A man found injured in the same house a Copperas Cove woman was found dead in has been arrested himself in connection to the case. 37-year-old Kevin Frazier is charged with murder and aggravated assault.
She called the police, she had filed for divorce, she had done everything that domestic violence experts tell women to do when they're trying to leave an abusive relationship safely. But sometimes, doing everything right isn't enough to survive. Today we're examining a case that shattered the quiet community of Copperas Cove, Texas, and exposed the deadly gaps in our systems meant to protect domestic violence victims. This is the story of Destiny Kerry, a 33-year-old mother of 6, a dedicated nurse and entrepreneur whose life was cut tragically short by the very man who vowed to love and protect. She made a 911 call that lasted only seconds, screaming in the background, then silence. By the time police arrived at 1000 Hobby Road, gunshots were already ringing out from behind the door. When they forced their way inside, Destiny was lying motionless near the front entrance, shot multiple times at point-blank range, dead at the scene. To understand this tragedy, we must first understand who Destiny Kerry was, not as a victim, but as a vibrant woman who built a life of purpose and ambition in Central Texas. Destiny Kerry was born in 1988 and raised her family in the area between Austin and Waco. At 33, she was a mother to 5 children and a grandmother to 1, but her identity extended far beyond those roles. She was a registered nurse working at a Georgetown medical facility, bringing compassion and skill to her patients every day. But Destiny was also an entrepreneur with big dreams. She owned 2 successful businesses in Killeen, High Saturday Boutique and High Saturday Shoutique, located at 1103 W Veterans Memorial Boulevard, Suite 105. These weren't just clothing stores. They were the physical manifestation of Destiny's vision and work ethic. According to her sister, Demetria Fifi, Destiny had training classes where she would actually help people start their business. She was described as someone who always poured into others, always wanting everybody to be successful. Destiny had received a PPP loan of $20,832 during the pandemic to keep her business afloat, demonstrating her commitment to building something lasting. She was even in the process of opening a 3rd business location in Dallas at the time of her death. Her 18-year-old daughter, Desira Cannon, described her mother as a hardworking woman who took care of all 6 of her children, worked as a nurse, had 2 businesses in Killeen, and was getting ready to set up her 3rd location in Dallas. She said her mother just always wanted to be happy, was always a fun person to be around, and that her laugh just lit up the room. To her customers and colleagues, Destiny was known for her infectious energy and her willingness to help others succeed. She would model clothes for her own boutique, personally design logos, and build her brand from the ground up with focus and determination. But behind the bright smile and successful facade, Destiny was living with a dangerous secret, one that would ultimately cost her everything. The man who would take Destiny's life was her husband, 37-year-old Kevin Frazier. According to records from Army Human Resources Command at Fort Knox, Kentucky, Frazier was a U.S. Army veteran who had served from July 2004 to April 2016, achieving the rank of Staff Sergeant. Frazier had 2 military occupations during his time in the Army: Public Affairs Specialist and Cannon Crew Member. He received several awards in his time in the military and served on 2 deployments to Iraq from December 2003 to March 2005 and from August 2006 to October 2007. From the outside, he appeared to be a decorated veteran, building a life with his successful wife. But according to family and friends, the reality behind closed doors was far different. According to police records, Killeen police had arrested Frazier multiple times in 2010, on suspicion of assault with bodily injury in September, and for violations of a magistrate's order and court order in October and November of that year. Those who knew the couple described a pattern of escalating control and surveillance. Frazier would monitor Destiny's phone, check her messages, and grow suspicious of her work calls. Every business meeting, every expansion plan, every sign of her growing independence became a source of conflict. The night before her murder, police had already been called to their home on Hobby Road for what was listed in the Daily Bulletin as an assault with bodily injury family violence report. Significantly, no charges were filed from that incident. According to family members, by this point, Destiny had already made the most dangerous decision of her life. She had decided to leave. She had filed for divorce and was making plans to escape the toxic marriage. What she didn't realize was that for a man like Kevin Frazier, losing control meant losing everything. And if he couldn't have her, no one could. Domestic violence experts consistently identify the period when a victim attempts to leave as the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship. Statistics show that a woman is 70 times more likely to be killed in the weeks after leaving an abusive partner than at any other time. The decision to leave an abusive relationship is incredibly complex. Victims often stay not because they want to, but because they're trying to survive. When they finally make the decision to leave, abusers often escalate their violence because they're losing the ultimate form of control. By early April 2022, Destiny had begun taking the steps that domestic violence advocates recommend. She had confided in family members about the abuse. She had started legal proceedings for divorce. She had called the police when violence occurred. But there's a cruel irony in domestic violence prevention. The very actions that are supposed to protect victims can sometimes escalate the danger they face. According to her sister Demetria Fifi, Destiny told Kevin she filed for divorce, which ignited the confrontation. Destiny was filing for divorce on April 7th, the day she was killed. In the final weeks of her life, those close to Destiny noticed changes in her social media presence. The family photos became less frequent. The personal posts about her relationship disappeared. Instead, her feeds focused on her business, her work, her accomplishments, anything but her home life. To outsiders, it might have looked like she was simply focusing on her career. But to those who knew the signs, it was a woman slowly erasing her personal life from public view, a common response when victims begin planning their escape. What Destiny couldn't have known was that Kevin Frazier was also making plans. Plans that would ensure if he couldn't control her life, he would control her death. April 7th, 2022, started like any other Thursday in Copperas Cove. The spring weather was mild, the suburban streets quiet. But inside the home at 1000 Hobby Road, a deadly confrontation was building. At exactly 12:25 p.m., the Copperas Cove Police Department received a 911 call from the 1000 block of Hobby Road. But this wasn't a typical emergency call. It was a hang-up call, and dispatch advised that screaming could be heard in the background before the call was disconnected. Officers were immediately dispatched to the address. They had no way of knowing they were racing toward a murder scene, or that their arrival would trigger the final, violent moments of Destiny Kerry's life. When the first officer arrived at the Hobby Road address, he followed standard protocol for a 911 hang-up call. He approached the front door and knocked, attempting to make contact with whoever was inside. According to the arrest affidavit, when the officer knocked, he heard a male voice from inside telling him to wait. The officer continued knocking, but then he heard something that changed everything, screaming coming from inside the residence. At that point, the officer had to make a split-second decision. Screaming from inside, after a 911 hang-up call, welfare concerns override normal entry procedures. The officer made the decision to force entry. He kicked open the front door. In that exact moment, he heard several gunshots coming from inside the residence. What the officer saw when he entered would haunt him forever. Destiny Kerry was lying on the ground near the front door, not moving, shot multiple times at point-blank range. A few steps away, in the living room, Kevin Frazier was lying on the ground with what appeared to be self-inflicted gunshot wounds to his torso. Police determined that Frazier fired the weapon using a Glock 27 semi-automatic pistol. The officer immediately placed Frazier in handcuffs and attempted life-saving measures on Destiny until paramedics arrived on scene. But it was already too late. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Destiny Jasmine Kerry, 33, was pronounced dead at the scene by Justice of the Peace Bill Price. Kevin Frazier was transported to Darnall Army Medical Center, where he was treated for his wounds and would eventually survive. But there was another victim that day, the responding officer himself. When Frazier fired those shots as the door was being kicked in, one bullet went through a window attached to the front entrance. The bullet passed through the officer's left pants leg, and glass shards embedded in his leg. This would later result in an additional charge of aggravated assault against a public servant. As investigators would later determine, this wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of uncontrolled rage. The evidence suggested that Kevin Frazier had planned this execution, knowing that police were outside, knowing that his wife had called for help, and choosing to ensure that her final call would be her last. The investigation into Destiny's murder was swift and straightforward. The physical evidence was overwhelming, the witness testimony clear, and the suspect was already in custody. But the interviews with Kevin Frazier would reveal the calculated nature of his actions. Police interviewed Frazier 3 separate times, once at the hospital while he was receiving treatment, and once at the Copperas Cove Police Department after he was treated and released. According to the arrest affidavit, Frazier's descriptions of events from these multiple interviews were inconsistent. Inconsistent statements immediately after a shooting incident are often a sign that the suspect is trying to construct a narrative that might justify their actions or reduce their culpability. But in this case, the physical evidence was overwhelming. According to the arrest affidavit, Kevin's description of events from the scene of the incident, the hospital, and the subsequent interview at the police department were not consistent. Kevin's description of the shooting was also inconsistent with the evidence obtained of Destiny's injuries as described by the medical examiner. The medical examiner's autopsy revealed additional details about the brutality of the attack. Destiny had been shot multiple times at close range, with the wounds indicating a deliberate and methodical execution rather than a heat-of-the-moment shooting. On April 10, 2022, 3 days after the murder, Kevin Frazier was officially arrested while still hospitalized. He was transported to the Coryell County Jail, where he was charged with 2 felonies, murder and aggravated assault against a public servant. During his arraignment before Justice of the Peace Bill Price, the same official who had pronounced Destiny dead at the scene, Frazier's bond was set at $1.75 million, $1 million for the murder charge and $750,000 for the assault charge. A bond of $1.75 million sends a clear message about how seriously the court took this case. For a domestic violence murder with aggravating circumstances like shooting at police, that's appropriate given the flight risk and danger to the community. By June 2022, a Coryell County grand jury had indicted Frazier on both charges, a first-degree felony charge of murder and a second-degree felony charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. But for Destiny's family, no amount of legal proceedings could bring back the woman they had lost. When Destiny Kerry died, she left behind more than just a successful business and a nursing career. She left behind 5 children and a grandchild who suddenly found themselves without a mother, and a community that struggled to understand how such a tragedy could happen. Demetria Fiffey, Destiny's sister from Georgia, took legal guardianship of the children and began the impossible task of putting their lives back together. She explained that she would take over guardianship of the children. The family had to relocate, leaving behind the only home and community many of the children had ever known. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. Destiny had been the primary breadwinner, supporting her children through her nursing salary and her business profits. With her death, both income sources disappeared overnight. Destiny's daughter described the devastating loss. She worked hard to give them the best of what she could. She was a hard worker. The community response was immediate and heartfelt. Within days of Destiny's death, flowers, candles, and memorial cards appeared outside her boutiques in Killeen. A memorial had been placed outside the door of High Saturday Boutique. Family and friends held a balloon release ceremony at her Killeen businesses, with people gathering to remember her life and the impact she had on others. Local customers who had known her came to pay their respects and share memories of a woman who had helped them feel beautiful and confident. Demetria started a GoFundMe campaign to help with funeral expenses and to support the children as they transitioned to their new life. The campaign was also meant to cover moving expenses as the family relocated. Demetria said she and her family planned to sell off the remaining stock from the boutique and shoe store, encouraging everybody to come down to support them, because all of that money would go toward moving expenses. But perhaps the most profound victims were the children who may have witnessed their mother's final moments. While police have never disclosed exactly which children were present during the shooting, neighbors reported that at least 1 or 2 of Destiny's children were in the house when the gunshots rang out. The psychological trauma of witnessing domestic violence, particularly the murder of a parent, can have lifelong effects on children. Studies show that children who witness intimate partner violence are at increased risk for PTSD, depression, anxiety, and behavioral problems. These children will carry this trauma for the rest of their lives. They've lost their sense of safety, their primary caregiver, and their understanding of the world as a predictable place. Recovery is possible, but it requires long-term, specialized care. As the immediate shock of Destiny's murder began to fade, difficult questions emerged about whether this tragedy could have been prevented. The warning signs had been there. Police had been called to the home before. Frazier had a history of domestic violence arrests. The most haunting detail was the timeline. Police had responded to the Hobby Road address just one day before the murder for a domestic violence incident, an assault with bodily injury, family violence report. Yet Kevin Frazier was still in the home the next day, still had access to weapons, and was still in a position to kill his wife. This case highlights every gap in our system. We have laws, we have procedures, we have protocols, but when push comes to shove, the system often fails to protect the people who need it most. In Texas, as in most states, removing someone from their home requires either an arrest with charges filed or a protective order issued by a court. The April 6th incident resulted in neither. No charges were filed, no emergency protective order was sought. Critics point to this as a critical missed opportunity. Had Frazier been arrested and charged on April 6th, he would have been in jail on April 7th when Destiny tried to file for divorce. Instead, he was free to carry out his deadly plan. Emergency protective orders exist for exactly this kind of situation. When there's been violence and a victim is trying to leave, courts can issue immediate protection, but that requires someone to ask for it and the system to respond quickly. The broader question is whether the criminal justice system is equipped to handle the complex dynamics of domestic violence. Traditional law enforcement approaches focus on arrest and prosecution after crimes have been committed, but domestic violence requires prevention and intervention before the ultimate crime occurs. Some experts argue that Frazier's military background may have contributed to the calculated nature of his attack. Veterans have higher rates of domestic violence than the general population, often related to untreated PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and the normalization of violence. Military training teaches people how to use violence effectively and how to remain calm under pressure. When those skills are turned against intimate partners, the results can be particularly deadly. Frazier had served 2 combat deployments in Iraq and had been trained in weapons handling as both a cannon crew member and public affairs specialist. The precision of his attack, timing it for when police were at the door, ensuring Destiny couldn't escape, suggested tactical planning rather than impulsive violence. But perhaps the most troubling aspect of this case is how ordinary it was. Every year in the United States, approximately 1,500 women are killed by current or former intimate partners. Destiny's story, while tragic, is repeated in communities across the country with depressing regularity. As of June 2022, Kevin Frazier was formally indicted by a grand jury on charges of first-degree murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The murder charge carries a potential sentence of life in prison without parole, or in Texas, potentially even the death penalty. However, records show that by June 2022, Frazier's bond was reduced from the original $1.75 million to just $275,000, a dramatic decrease that alarmed Destiny's family and advocates. The bond reduction raised questions about whether the justice system was taking this case seriously. For a crime involving domestic violence, murder, and assault on a police officer, many expected Frazier to be held without bond entirely. Legal experts note that bond reductions can occur for various reasons: overcrowding in jails, changes in defense strategy, or judicial discretion. But the dramatic nature of this reduction was unusual for such a serious case. Bond is supposed to ensure that a defendant appears for trial and doesn't pose a danger to the community. In a domestic violence murder case, both of those concerns are heightened. A significant bond reduction suggests either new information or a change in the court's assessment of risk. As the case moves toward trial, prosecutors face the challenge of seeking justice, not just for Destiny, but for the broader community. This case has become a symbol of the deadly consequences of domestic violence and the urgent need for systemic reform. The aggravated assault charge stemming from shooting at the police officer adds another layer of complexity. In Texas, assaulting a public servant is taken very seriously, often resulting in enhanced penalties even beyond the underlying crime. When you shoot at police officers, you're not just attacking an individual, you're attacking the rule of law itself. Juries take that very seriously, and it often influences their decision-making in significant ways. For Destiny's family, the legal proceedings represent both hope for justice and a prolonged period of reliving their trauma. Every court appearance, every legal filing, every delay extends their suffering while keeping the case in the public eye. In the months following her death, local domestic violence organizations reported an increase in calls to their hotlines. Some women said that hearing about Destiny's case prompted them to seek help for their own situations. Sometimes it takes a tragedy like this to wake people up to the reality of domestic violence. Women see what happened to Destiny and realize that it could happen to them if they don't get help. The case also highlighted the unique vulnerabilities faced by women who are economically independent. Contrary to stereotypes about domestic violence only affecting women who are financially dependent on their abusers, Destiny's success may have actually increased her danger. Research shows that women's economic independence can trigger increased violence from controlling partners who feel threatened by their loss of dominance. Destiny's growing business success, her professional achievements as a nurse, and her increasing community profile may have all contributed to Kevin Frazier's escalating jealousy and rage. We often tell women that financial independence will protect them from abuse, but the reality is more complex. For some abusers, a woman's success represents a direct challenge to their sense of control and masculinity. As painful as Destiny's story is, it offers crucial lessons about domestic violence prevention and the warning signs that too often go unheeded. Understanding these patterns could help save other lives. The escalation pattern in Destiny's case was textbook. Initial controlling behaviors, escalating to surveillance and monitoring, followed by threats and violence when the victim attempts to leave. Each stage represents an opportunity for intervention. The warning signs were all there: jealousy over her professional success, controlling behavior, previous arrests for domestic violence. When these factors combine with access to weapons and military training, you have a perfect storm for lethality. Experts identify several key warning signs that indicate when domestic violence may escalate to murder: threats to kill, access to weapons, extreme jealousy, stalking behavior, and escalation when the victim tries to leave. In Destiny's case, multiple risk factors were present. Frazier had a history of domestic violence arrests, access to firearms, military training that included weapons expertise, and escalating jealousy over his wife's professional success. The most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim is when they decide to leave. This is when abusers lose their sense of control and may resort to the ultimate act of dominance: murder. Destiny was killed on the very day she was filing for divorce, a timing that was not coincidental. Safety planning is crucial for anyone leaving an abusive relationship. This includes securing important documents, identifying safe places to go, establishing code words with family and friends, and working with domestic violence professionals who understand the complexities involved. But individual safety planning is not enough. We need systemic changes that address the root causes of domestic violence and provide better protection for victims who are trying to escape. This includes better training for law enforcement on domestic violence dynamics, faster processing of protective orders, more comprehensive background checks for firearm purchases, and enhanced penalties for domestic violence offenses. We also need cultural changes that challenge the attitudes and beliefs that contribute to intimate partner violence. The idea that men have the right to control their partners, that jealousy is a sign of love, that women are property to be possessed. These toxic beliefs create the foundation for abuse. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, it's important to know that help is available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and can be reached at 1-800-799-7233. They provide crisis intervention, safety planning, and referrals to local resources. In Texas, the Texas Council on Family Violence operates a statewide network of programs and services for domestic violence survivors. Local law enforcement agencies also have specialized domestic violence units trained to handle these complex cases. Safety planning is essential for anyone considering leaving an abusive relationship. This process should be done with the help of trained domestic violence advocates who understand the unique risks involved. Some key elements of safety planning include identifying safe places to go in an emergency, keeping important documents and emergency supplies readily accessible, establishing code words with trusted friends or family members, and documenting evidence of abuse. Technology can both help and endanger domestic violence victims. While smartphones can provide access to help and resources, they can also be used by abusers for surveillance and control. Domestic violence advocates can help survivors understand how to use technology safely. Financial planning is also crucial, as economic dependence often keeps victims trapped in abusive relationships. This might include opening a separate bank account, establishing credit in your own name, and identifying sources of income and support. For friends and family members of domestic violence victims, it's important to know how to help without putting the victim in additional danger. Offering non-judgmental support, helping with safety planning, and learning about domestic violence dynamics can all make a difference. It's also important not to pressure a victim to leave before they're ready. Leaving an abusive relationship is a process, not an event, and victims often know better than anyone else what actions might increase their danger. Community members can help prevent domestic violence by challenging the attitudes and behaviors that contribute to abuse. This includes speaking out against sexist jokes and comments, teaching young people about healthy relationships, and supporting organizations that work to end domestic violence. Workplaces can also play a role by implementing policies that support employees who are experiencing domestic violence, providing training on recognizing warning signs, and creating safe environments where victims feel comfortable seeking help. The medical community has an important role to play as well. Healthcare providers are often the first to see signs of abuse and can provide crucial interventions and referrals. Training healthcare workers to recognize and respond to domestic violence can save lives. Destiny Kerry was more than the circumstances of her death. She was described by her sister as inspirational and full of life, someone who was so positive and wanted everybody to do good. She was a mother who worked hard to give her children the best life possible, a nurse who cared for others in their most vulnerable moments, and an entrepreneur who built something meaningful from nothing. The last time Demetria Fifi saw her sister was in December when Destiny traveled to Georgia to see her nephew, Tariq Carpenter, a football standout, graduate from Georgia Tech University. It was a moment of pride and family celebration, showing Destiny's commitment to being present for the important moments in her loved ones' lives. Demetria said she cannot get Destiny's cute laugh out of her head, a testament to the joy and lightness that Destiny brought to the world despite the darkness she was facing at home. Her businesses, High Saturday Boutique and High Saturday Shoutique, were more than just stores. They were extensions of her desire to help other women feel confident and beautiful. The training classes she offered and the branding kits she provided showed her commitment to lifting up other entrepreneurs and helping them succeed. The memorial that appeared outside her boutique after her death, the balloon release ceremony held by family and friends, and the overwhelming community support for her children all demonstrate the lasting impact she had on those around her. But perhaps Destiny's most important legacy is the conversation her death has sparked about domestic violence prevention and the need for systemic change. Her story has become a rallying cry for advocates and a reminder that we must do better to protect vulnerable victims. Every time someone learns the warning signs of domestic violence because of Destiny's story, every time a victim seeks help because they remember what happened to her, every time a policy is changed or a program is funded because her case demonstrated the need, That is her legacy living on. Her children, now being raised by their loving aunt Demetria, carry forward not just the trauma of their loss, but also the strength and determination that their mother embodied. They are living proof that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, love and resilience can prevail. The businesses she built, though they had to be closed after her death, represented more than just commercial success. They were proof that with hard work, vision, and determination, it's possible to create something meaningful and lasting. Destiny Kerry's story is a tragedy, but it doesn't have to be in vain. Each of us has a role to play in preventing domestic violence and supporting survivors. We can start by educating ourselves about the warning signs and the resources available to help. We can support the organizations working to end domestic violence through donations, volunteering, and advocacy. We can contact our elected representatives and demand better funding for domestic violence programs, stronger laws to protect victims, and improved training for law enforcement and court personnel. We can challenge the cultural attitudes that contribute to domestic violence. The idea that jealousy is romantic, that men have the right to control their partners, that women are responsible for men's violent behavior. These beliefs create the foundation for abuse, and changing them requires all of us to speak up. We can teach our children about healthy relationships, respect, and equality. We can model these values in our own relationships and friendships. We can intervene when we see warning signs of abuse, offering support without judgment, and connecting victims with professional help. If you're a business owner, you can implement policies that support employees experiencing domestic violence. If you're a healthcare provider, you can learn to recognize and respond to signs of abuse. If you're an educator, you can incorporate domestic violence prevention into your curriculum. If you're experiencing domestic violence yourself, please know that help is available and that what happened to Destiny doesn't have to happen to you. Leaving an abusive relationship is dangerous, but it can be done safely with the right support and planning. Remember that abuse is never your fault, no matter what your abuser tells you. You deserve to live free from fear, to pursue your dreams without permission, to love and be loved without violence or control. Destiny Kerry called for help, but the system failed to protect her in time. We must do better for the next woman who makes that call, for the next mother trying to protect her children, for the next entrepreneur whose success threatens her abuser's sense of control. Destiny Jasmine Kerry was 33 years old when her life was taken from her. She was a mother, a grandmother, a nurse, an entrepreneur, and a sister. She was a woman with dreams and plans, and so much left to give to the world. She did everything right. She called for help. She filed for divorce. She tried to leave safely. But in the end, those actions weren't enough to save her from a man who believed that if he couldn't control her, no one could have her. Her story is a tragedy, but it's also a call to action. We must do better. We must build systems that actually protect victims. We must challenge the attitudes that enable abuse. And we must never stop fighting for a world where no woman dies simply because she dared to be free. Remember Destiny Kerry. Say her name, share her story, and most importantly, use her legacy to help create the change that